Good evening, I'm Guy Schoen and joined in our studio tonight by Anastasia Lavrina and Orkan Amashov. On A News tonight, China announces a $1.4 trillion fiscal package to help boost their economy as it braces for potential trade tensions with the US under Donald Trump. Laura Westbrook is in Hong Kong and has more for us on this story.
Finance Minister Lan Fuan estimated the hidden debt of local governments was 14.3 trillion yuan at the end of 2023. He said 2 trillion yuan would be allocated each year from 2024 to 2026 to help local governments resolve their debts. Local government debts had ballooned during the pandemic and due to a property crisis, leaving authorities with less resources to try to kickstart economic growth. What wasn't announced was anything specific about property or consumption to boost domestic demand. But the finance minister vowed to take more forceful fiscal policy next year, and that does leave some room for more steps ahead. China's economy grew 4.6% in the third quarter, and that was the weakest pace since March last year. China is dealing with a property crisis, millions of young graduates unable to find work, and weak consumer spending. Beijing is trying to put policies in place to hit its annual growth target of around 5% growth this year. But analysts say that China needs to deal with the problems dogging its economy before Trump's tariffs hit. Donald Trump had campaigned on a promise to raise tariffs on all Chinese imports to 60%, and that has huge implications for China's economy. Chinese President Xi Jinping reportedly told Donald Trump that China and the US would benefit from cooperation and lose from confrontation. And he also said that a stable US-China relationship was in the interests of both countries. Now, analysts say that Chinese officials will be waiting to see what kind of policies the Trump administration will implement and how it might counter them. Laura Westbrook for A News in Hong Kong.
Well, other analysts in China also see a possibility of increasing economic tensions. Let's have a listen now to Han Shenlin, country director of the Asia Group. He previously shared some pretty strong views regarding the challenges faced by the two biggest economies.
At least in terms of the U.S. trade policy towards China, my guess is that they'll look back at where the last trade discussion went during the first Trump administration, and I suspect the Trump administration will say that we still have unfinished business here. So certainly the signals we've gotten so far are a lot more tariffs, or at least the threat of that. I believe that Trump's threat of 60% tariffs will likely happen, and that he has actually voiced it several occasions in the past, and including his most recent 3-hour interview on the Joe Rogan interview show. Under the Trump administration, there would likely be an atrophy of the alliance system. So as you look at the various alliances such as NATO, at least those may be weakened a bit, or at least there's going to be more pressure on partners to pay for their share of the protection, for example. So that may be an opportunity for China to allow them a more forward presence within their own geographic area, primarily the Pacific. But where it could be challenging is on the trade side. And certainly if trade does go up, that is a greater challenge for China, because it means that China's efforts to try to export their way to growth, for example, are more likely going to be stymied, and that means there's going to have to be more focus on the domestic economy. As far as China's exports are concerned, by far the largest market is US and Europe. And so they don't necessarily want to fight a two-front war in that trade space. And my suspicion is the types of strategies they've used in the past, for example, to try to divide opinion between US and Europe and try to divide opinion within the European states will continue to be an ongoing tactic to try to slow down that evolution of higher tariffs.
Well, Orkan, Europe clearly important, as we heard there, for China to navigate their way through this economic storm. The US also important, Russia too. What role for Central Asia, though?
Yeah, the circumstances enveloping Central Asia, they're incredibly complicated. It would be utterly impossible to understand those circumstances in simple terms. I think that one element there is that China has been increasing its economic presence there, particularly after February 2022. And for China, it's very important to if in terms of economics, of course, replace Russia there, because what we noticed that in terms of trade turnover between 5 Central Asian countries and Russia, that figure back in 2022 was about 42 billion. The corresponding figure when it comes to China, Central Asia trade turnover was back then 70 billion US dollars, and now 2024 figure is 90 billion US dollars. So you see this economic presence incrementally increasing, and that will continue. We also noticed that there is a competition involving the US and China in the context of a middle corridor in particular, because for China, from Chinese perspective, middle corridor is a perfectly plausible proposition because it does connect China with Europe via Central Asia, South Caucasus and Turkey. American perspective is slightly delicate here. For Americans, connecting Central Asia with Europe is very important, but for them it's very vital that this route does not go through Russia or Iran, but they do not want China to benefit from middle corridor. So this element should be understood. From the perspective of Central Asian countries, I don't think their choice there is between choosing between Russia and China. For them, it's all about their own consolidation. And we have noticed this, the format called Central Asia Plus. It's about Central Asian countries together negotiating their cooperation models with other big powers, including China and US. And in a sense, this is also very conducive to the interests of Azerbaijan and the wider South Caucasus region, because they will be able to have leverage when they negotiate with bigger powers. So the circumstances there are incredibly complicated. And today I had a chance to speak to Faris Ismailzadeh MP on those issues, and it'd be nice to listen to him as well.
Definitely the Chinese participation in economic projects of Central Asia is increasing. Day by day we can see more trade turnover between Central Asian countries and China, and there's more involvement of China in energy projects. And lately this East-West transport corridor is also becoming a vital project for the region, and Chinese involvement in these, Chinese contributions to the infrastructure development, to the railway projects, the road projects, they're definitely increasing Chinese influence in the region. Now, certainly, US is very worried about this growing Chinese influence in the region, and the so-called One Belt, One Road project is definitely of concern for US policymakers. They believe that this will further cement Chinese economic presence and political presence in the Central Asia, Caucasus, Greater Eurasia region. And I believe that Trump administration will do maximum possible to limit the Chinese involvement in the region and somehow to prevent further development of East-West One Belt, One Road project. Generally, Central Asia region is regarded as Russia's backyard, and Russia is, definitely keeping its influence in the region. But we have seen in the past decades growing economic presence of China. So far, I think Russia has been tolerating this, especially considering that this is just economic influence, not so much political influence or, let's say, interference into the domestic political affairs of these countries. I think that currently Russia and China, they need each other, especially in regards to war in Ukraine. So I think that Russians will tolerate Chinese projects in the region. In the future, I think that Russia will simply not be able to present much competition to Chinese economic influence because of the size of the countries and the amount of investments. So I think that they will find a way to coexist in the region and try to make sure that both of them are cooperating against the Western influence.
Orkan, another initiative, another factor that's being widely discussed in this region is, of course, COP29. It's upon us here in Azerbaijan. We've heard today that the Russian president will not attend, but the Russian Prime Minister will. Let's just have a listen to that announcement.
Yes,
President Aliyev invited me to the conference, but I was there not so long ago, and President Ilham Aliyev and I agreed that Russia will be represented at the high level and that Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin will attend this event.
Okan, should we read anything into this?
Well, I mean, if one who does engage in mental gymnastics could actually read too much into this, but I would consider it as something that I expected. To be absolutely honest, there was no element of surprise. I think the announcement, of course, was made today, but it has been in the offing for some time, for some considerable time. One element there is that Vladimir Putin scaled back on his international journeys for the past few years. We understand that. We also know that, by the way, he will not attend G20 late November in Brazil. COP20 is another important development, and we will be dealing with the issues of climate change and so forth. So, bearing in mind Putin's general tendency not to attend big events, I'm not surprised. And number two reason why I'm not surprised, because Vladimir Putin was here in August, and if there was any important bilateral meeting that should be conducted between President Aliyev and Putin, that meeting was conducted in August, so there was no extra motivation for him to be here. And with all due fairness, the Prime Minister Mishustin will be here, and it's very important that all actors, whatever difference between international actors may be, all actors involved, they must be involved at COP29, because the challenge that we're facing is of global nature, it's of universal nature, and isolating one country would be misguided. So I'm very hopeful about COP29, and I'm not particularly surprised about Putin's decision not to come, announcement not to come, and I wouldn't read too much into it.
Anastasia, moving further along the middle corridor towards Europe, we've heard today that the President of China and the President of Italy have both met. We know that Europe is increasingly an important destination for China. Join the dots then for us. Give us a sense of the importance of Europe to China.
Of course, for China, it's very important to increase the level of its presence in not only in the region of Central Asia, South Caucasus, but also to Europe. Doesn't matter whether we are talking about One Belt, One Road project or about Middle Corridor or any kind of energy initiative which is on the agenda at the moment. China is trying to be as one of the key investors, and definitely China is willing to raise the level of trade turnover with some European countries. And if I'm not mistaken, some European countries previously made a statement saying that for them it's very important to develop the partnership with Chinese government, with Chinese companies. Doesn't matter whether United States is willing to see this development or not. I totally agree with what was said, that United States will try to limit Chinese involvement in all of this infrastructural project. Most probably we should expect more sanctions towards Iran when it comes to the cooperation between Iran and China, but we cannot ignore the fact that China is increasing its presence in all of these projects. And coming back to COP29, which is a big event expected to start next week in Baku in Azerbaijan, yes, the countries are willing to work on development of green agenda, but still the need in gas and oil industry is still relevant. And talking about infrastructural development in the regions, we cannot ignore the growing significance of Azerbaijan and the region itself for Europe as gas exporters, like the project Salt and Gas Corridor. There is still negotiations about the partnership between Azerbaijan and Italy. Apart from green energy transition, also the partnership in energy sphere. Today I had a chance to talk with a very good expert from Italy, Carlo Marino, Vice President of the Italian Azerbaijani Association in Milan, who explains in details why this cooperation in energy between Azerbaijan and Italy, Azerbaijan and Europe is still relevant and important. And now we can listen.
A few days ago in Rome has taken place a meeting in the European Commission premises, where it was discussed about the energy corridors from Central Asia to Europe. I was present in that meeting, and there were also the ambassadors of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Iran, and So this proves the importance of this question for the European Union. In fact, energetic corridors are a strategic means for economies and above all for European economies. Azerbaijan corridors arriving in southern Italy in the region of Apulia has been so important for Italy after the closing of the Nord Stream corridor coming from Russia. And the gas coming from Azerbaijan to Italy has helped to contain the supply of gas and the costs. So Italy and Azerbaijan are now strategic partners from the energetic point of view. Of course, Italy is looking for opportunities also in Central Asia, in particular in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and this has been proven also by the visits of high-level leaders of Italy in these countries and from the leaders of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan to Italy since 2022. Of course, one has to mention also the visit of His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, who arrived to Italy even recently. So my opinion is that we must continue to protect these corridors, and the protection of the corridors is a strategic question because as we have seen with the Nord Stream question, they can be jeopardized.
Well, thank you for all our guests for joining us, and thank you, Orkan and Anastasia, for being with us. And thank you for joining us tonight. Do stay with us for the very latest headlines. And from all of us here in Baku, a very good evening.